I love hard execution in fighting games. It's not for everyone, I get that, but for me there is no substitute to the endorphins garnered from pulling off some mechanically difficult stuff in a real match. This love, however, doesn't mean I can't appreciate developers making execution easier when it's done delicately and in a way that is a net positive to the flow of the game. So cast away your expectations of easy inputs or gigantic buffer windows, and let's talk about some of the interesting ways in which developers make fighting games easier. Due to the nature of 3D games, their typical dialer combo system and ability to delay strings, large buffer windows are often mandatory for these games to function. Unfortunately for us, however, that can cause issues when trying to execute individual sequential attacks. Let's look at an example. Here is a universal situation in TheoryFighter. I press punch and my opponent blocks it. Punch leaves me at +2 on block, meaning it is technically my turn, but my opponent might still press something like a crouch punch to try and steal back momentum. The most straightforward response to this that the entire cast possesses is to follow up your punch with a forward punch. This is a frame trap. It will beat common options such as the down jab and give me a counter hit that I can use for better mix if I'm successful with my read. For this to work, you need to keep it tight. You can't leave a gap between these two attacks, otherwise the opponent will be able to sneak something through and begin their offense. It should be very easy in theory to do this because the game has an absolutely huge 12 frame buffer. The problem is that if you press that forward punch too quickly, you'll get your punch string, and that is no good if it loses to crouch punch. Fortunately for us, Sega thought of this and added in buffer cancelling. If I press punch, then guard, the game will essentially clear the memory of my previous input, meaning no matter what I press after, it will not add onto the string. So to accurately and safely do this frame trap, all I need to press is punch, guard, then forward punch, and the buffer will do the rest for me. Its uses aren't just limited to neutral either. Playing Leon, I'll use it for a bunch of my combos. This is my counter hit down back kick combo, and in the middle I'll need to link a back forward punch plus kick into a back down forward punch, and similar to the last example, if I'm too quick, I'm getting the punch follow up to my back forward punch plus kick, and if I'm too slow, I won't get the ground bounce I require to get my ender. So once again, throw a guard in there to clear the input history, and boom, we've got ourselves a tight link. What's fun about this is you're essentially trading timing for more frequent and faster inputs. Depending on the player, one approach might be more challenging than the other, or you might use a combination of both depending on the situation and how much room you have left in your mental stack. It's just a bit more nuanced than simply making combos easy, and I like a trade-off.
What a knucklehead!
This is a problem that's existed since day one, the walk forward Hadouken. It's hard to do because it overlaps with the input of your Shoryuken. To avoid the DP coming out, you'll need to pause after your walk forward, or you'll need to input a half circle forward, which is basically just a surrogate for a pause. Capcom could easily fix this, and they have with characters like Akuma, where they've given him a half circle back fireball. But this is an intentional limitation. They don't want Ryu to have the flexibility of walking forward and throwing a fireball without that pause for balance and design purposes. King of Fighters is different though. This is a game that's meant to be played fast and have very little in the way of limitations in terms of execution, so they built a solution to this. If your fireball is quarter circle forward, you can end the input with an up forward and it will always out prioritize the input for a DP, meaning you can run forward and always get your fireball. It can also be useful for combos because a lot of characters have unique normal attacks bound to forward plus button, and without this tech, certain strings would be incredibly difficult to do. Like here with Iori, where I'm trying to combo his forward A into a fireball. Without the up forward, I'm getting his DP nearly every time. Does this make execution easier in the game? Absolutely, but it also speeds the game up and gives a ton of flexibility to characters that could potentially have been left with this otherwise kind of silly limitation, at least in the context of KOF. and that given speed then adds back into the game's difficulty, leaving it pretty much where it started out, which is nice. Unlike Street Fighter, in Tekken the room for error on simultaneous button inputs is very small. Now you could simply bind one button as a macro to do all the timing for you, but Tekken has a mechanic built in to alleviate at least some of the room for error with just your normal 4 buttons. This is a technique called button buffering, and it is as simple as it gets in execution. If I press then hold 1, I can then input 2 and the game will register it as 1 plus 2. It works with any combination of buttons. You could use it for Brian's taunt, key charge, or really anything. It is fantastic for combos. Here with Kuma, if I do his pretty standard wall extension with back 2-1 followed by 2 plus 1, I can just hold the 1 from the first string and button buffer the 2 plus 1 afterwards. This gives me the ability to not only guarantee that both buttons are pressed simultaneously, I can actually double tap the input or even mash it, once again helping ensure I'm finishing my combo. It's all very character specific, but there really is no limit to its potential for frame traps, combos, or even chain grabs. It's neat, it's efficient, and it's non-intrusive. Some people think of King of Fighters as this game with extremely difficult combos, but honestly it is a lot more simple than you might think, and that is because SNK have a couple of techniques to help you, most notably of which to me is the button hold trick. Let's say I'm knocked down and on wake up I want to go for a reversal. You could just time the DP so it hits as soon as you stand, or you could make it way easier by inputting the DP early, then holding the attack button. By holding the button, we can give our specials or supers a huge buffer window. Basically, the game will wait until the first possible frame in which our character is in a neutral state, then execute the attack. You could also use this as an easy way to achieve frame perfect punishes against an opponent, or you could use it for links. It's pretty common in this game for characters to link specials into other specials, and by using button hold trick, we can completely trivialize the process. You just have to be quick. Persona actually has a kind of version of this, although its application is far more beginner centric, and thus it's limited in terms of its practical use. They call it S-hold. Basically, you just hold down your A button and after 60 frames, you'll see a gauge appear. This gauge has 5 levels to it that contain various attacks that are executed by simply releasing the button. The first level does nothing, the second will do a skill, the third will do an SP skill, the fourth will do an awakening SP skill, and the fifth will instant kill. To note, the last 3 of those need the meter typically required to activate. What's useful about this is you can charge it during your own super animations. So say you're comboing a super into a super, you can simply hold the A down until you reach your desired attack, then release it. And behind this is a huge buffer window, so you can be pretty sloppy with your timing and still get a frame perfect action after the animation is finished. Now I think it is debatable if this next one was intended as an ease of use addition to the game or just as a mechanic. But in recent times, variations of this original idea have become subject to a lot of debate around difficulty and execution, so I'm going to include it. I am of course talking about macros. Now we need to narrow down that term a little. I'm not talking about binding a button in a console game to do specific actions with one input. I'm talking about button presses that substitute directional inputs, and where we first find them for Capcom is in Children of the Atom. If you press 2 punches, you get a dash. It is a shortcut for your forward input, and you can also press 2 kicks to substitute a super jump, rather than hitting down then up. These macros certainly make movement easier. Instead of dashing traditionally, which is subject to a lot of travel time on the stick, with 2 punches I can do it all in one frame, and if I've got the stick in neutral, I can block the frame after, which is a relatively safe way to approach. The reason I question if this is for ease of execution is because it gives you access to things otherwise impossible, some of which are intended, some not. You need to use the macro to air dash, and that makes sense. If you're playing a game with an 8-way dash, the last thing you want to be doing is pressing down forward to try jump. But then you also have things like wave dashing, which without a macro is far slower and input intensive. As the Versus series continues, this dash macro becomes even more core to the game's design, giving you the ability to cancel air normals into dashes, resulting in things like the ROM Infinite. What I like most about this macro is the fact I don't want to always use it. If I'm blocking something and I want to dash out of block stun to say punish, I'll want to press forward because the macro overlaps with my push block input. Or let's say I'm trying to do Rogue's Infinite in X-Men vs Street Fighter. I need to dash between the hits, but if I do that with a macro, I might accidentally chain into another normal, which is no good. I think what I like most about these mechanics is the fact that they're all active choices. Things aren't simply easier by default. They're easier with technique, and sometimes there's also reasons to not use them, giving a lot more nuance to the game's system. I put them almost in the same category as double tapping a button to increase the chance of a successful link. There is effort and consideration involved. Sure, I could double tap every input, but then am I going to have my hand positioned correctly to cancel said attack? It really depends on the player and situation. There are also active decisions by developers about what should be harder and what should be easier. It's not just a sweeping universal change to something like a buffer window, which will not only make combos easier, but punishes and frame perfect turn taking easier too. In the button hold trick example, this technique explicitly doesn't apply to normal attacks, so timing is still part of the game, they're just more specific about when it is a notable factor. Ease of execution, like a lot of things in fighting games, is a far more interesting topic than Twitter makes it out to be. Making things easy has consequence. No matter what you add to the game, there will be unexpected ramifications, and sometimes it can ultimately result in the game being even harder for a beginner to play. Hell, even input leniency, the most basic quality of life feature in fighters that gives you a small window between your directional input and button press for specials to come out, has resulted in some of the hardest B&B combos in Street Fighter. Unfortunately, this topic for some reason brings out the absolute worst in the scene, creating huge divides between people of different preferences. But I hope this video shows you at least some clever examples of how that gap can be closed in unique ways that benefit everyone.